Assalamualaikum, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are right now. Welcome to the Together for the Tropics webinar. This is the 12th webinar in our series of webinars called The Future Belongs to the Tropics. And today's webinar might possibly be the most tropical of our webinars, as we are celebrating the International Day of the Tropics. And what better way to celebrate this webinar than a forward-looking discussion on how nations in the tropics can come together. This webinar series is co-organized by the Mahathir Science Award Foundation, the Academy of Sciences of Malaysia, and the International Science Council Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. It's also a lead-up to a conference called the International Conference on Tropical Sciences that will be jointly organized by the Mahathir Science Award Foundation and the Academy of Sciences of Malaysia. So without further ado, to introduce and also moderate the webinar, we have Professor Emerita Mazlan Othman, who is a trustee of the Mahathir Science Award Foundation, also Director of the International Science Council Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, and a Senior Fellow of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia. Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Mazlan Othman to give her remarks. Sorry, Professor, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Alia. And good day, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome again to the series of webinars on the theme, The Future Belongs to the Tropics. Now, before we start, allow me to give you some insight on why we believe the future belongs to the tropics. For some of you who have been following our webinar series, thank you very much. I apologize for this repetition, but it's, I think, well worth repeating. That the tropics is resource rich. As a region, it accounts for 40% of the world's total surface area, but hosts nearly 95% of the world's mangrove forests. It holds approximately 80% of the world's biodiversity. 54% of the world's renewable water resources are in the tropics. And this I like very much, 82% of the world's living languages are spoken in the tropics. We know that by 2050, the region will host more than half of the world's population and 2/3 of the children. But at the same time, it is sad to acknowledge that 85% of the poorest people in the world live in the tropics. So while tropical nations have made significant progress, they face a variety of challenges that demand focused attention across a range of development indicators and data in order to achieve sustainable development. Now, to propel the attention of scientists and policymakers to the tropics, the Academy of Sciences Malaysia established the Mahathir Science Award that gives $100,000 to scientists who have made significant contributions to tropical sciences. Some of you, I hope, you have witnessed a few minutes ago the ceremony highlighting the 2020 winner of the award, Sir Alimuddin Zumla, in the tropical medicine category. Now, to support the Mahathir Science Award, we are organizing a virtual international conference on tropical sciences, their contributions to sustainability, or Topside, from 25th to 27th of December this year. Now, we have held many activities to build awareness of the goals of Topside 2021 to attract the participation amongst policymakers, implementers, both in the private and public sectors, and researchers. So far, we have had 11 webinars, as Alia told you, covering the topics of mangroves, youth, engineering, coffee, the black gold, the tropics, tropical cities, tropical mountain, tropical forests, and most recently, the tropical ocean. Now, in organizing these webinars, our team learned a very important lesson. And that is, there are numerous institutions and organizations located all over the world, not just in the tropics, that deal with the tropics. But most interestingly, there are numerous groupings of individuals and organizations, both intergovernmental and non-governmental, that have found common grounds for cooperation on different issues of the tropics. Some examples are the Tropical Forest Alliance, the International Women's Coffee Alliance, the Sustainable Tropics Alliance, and many more. As you can tell, discovering each of them took a long time. And we know by no means exhausted the search. Now we think that one of the tangible outcomes of the Tropical Conference could be a sort of agreement or a commitment to look at the possibility of forming a loose umbrella grouping of these various groupings. I hesitate to call it by any name, but an umbrella grouping is what we have in mind. And we are promoting this collaboration idea for two reasons. One is that the countries in the tropics are disparate. We are disparate socio-culturally, economically, and politically. However, we have much in common, such as the threat of climate change, chronic problem of underdevelopment, and inequalities in health. By collaborating, we can consolidate our efforts in solving the issues and problems and in exploiting the opportunities.
Recording stopped.
The second is that by collaborating, we can also endeavor.
Recording in progress.
We can endeavor to have common positions in international negotiations. I know this is a tall order, but it could be something we can work towards. So today we have invited 3 organizations dealing with issues in the tropics. They will share with us their different mechanisms of cooperation and share their best practices. From these discussions, I hope we can strategize the way forward. So let's start now. We have 3 distinguished speakers from 3 different organizations, and I'm going to start with Professor Sandra Harding. Sandra is the Vice Chancellor and President of James Cook University, Australia. She leads the State of the Tropics project in Australia. You saw the video of it. And she will be joined by Dr. Anne Penny, who's also from the State of the Tropics project. So, Sandra, Anne, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nazland, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come along and speak with you today for this very important webinar. Can I first of all just compliment you on all you do in terms of coming to grips with the issues of the tropical world. It is so important, and certainly we share a great enthusiasm for wanting to make sure that the issues of the tropical world are fully understood, acknowledged, and much more importantly, perhaps acted upon. So Anne Penny and I have been working on the State of the Tropics project now for quite some time, and so we thought it might be helpful if we do a bit of a shared presentation for you. I'm going to say a little bit about the background to the project and its history, and then Anne's going to talk a little bit about the challenges and the opportunities, and to get Nazlan to some of that best practice that you were talking about before. Might I say we are very eager, though, to hear from others about their particular approach as well, because it strikes me, as you've implied, Nazlan, we're really all about the same thing. So I can tell you a little bit about the State of the Tropics group. And it's important that you understand that this came from a series of discussions at James Cook University, because James Cook University is a university that was set up now more than 60 years ago to be Australia's University for the Tropics. So when we were set up in northern Queensland, in tropical Australia, the idea was that we were to focus on certainly the issues of the north in our state of Queensland, Northern Australia, but also we were to focus on education research on issues of importance to the peoples of the tropics. And over so many years now, there's been a great deal of work undertaken in this area. We operate and we're physically located adjacent to the Great Barrier Reef. So, of course, we do a lot of work in marine science, but also terrestrial, tropical biology, tropical health and medicine, but also the humanities, linguistics, and a whole range of areas. And what we do is we focus on the issues of the tropics. So several years ago now, it's about just over 10 years ago, we also, I guess, as you have, Maslin, too, articulated to ourselves and to others the need to have a shared vision about the tropics and to find a way to connect researchers across the world who were interested in the tropics, but also with an eye to then thinking about how we may build capacity in the tropics and build research and development in the tropics and how we might participate in that as well. And so just over 10 years ago, a group of 11 institutions met in Singapore, and we contemplated a joint project. And that joint project was to prepare a report on the state of the tropics. What we wanted to do was to mark the tropics. We wanted to map it. We wanted to have it recognised as a zone of the world in much the same way that we're more accustomed to be thinking of the world as north and south and east and west, developed, developing, Asia, the rest. We wanted us to think again about that Aristotelian, actually, zonal idea of the world, the frigid zone, the temperate zone, the torrid zone being in the tropics. And we thought one way of drawing attention would be to do a major piece of work. We draw upon secondary data, however, from a range of different sources, which sought to map the tropics and to have us better understand it. So there needed to be a research question. That research question was, is life in the tropics getting better? And when that group of 11 institutions from around the world met in Singapore to discuss this, we decided the parameters of that report, and the work was done on that report. And the report itself was launched, the first State of the Tropics report, looked at a number of indicators, more than 50 indicators of health. We looked at the human system, we looked at the environment as well, the ecosystem too, and measured progress, if you like, in a number of different ways. So that report was finalised, and it was launched on the 29th of June 2014 by Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, and I had the great privilege of sharing the stage with her on that occasion in Yangon when that report was launched. And some of those data that Maslin identified were revealed in that report. So the report's release was very important, and a lot of work went in behind that, as you might imagine, and also went ahead. Then, and I'm going to sort of, I know, get to the strengths and challenges and hand over to Anne at the moment, but just to let you know, the project and the consortium didn't stop there. So we've continued to work, and we were really delighted that on the 29th of June 2016, it was actually in June, earlier in June in 2016, that was when the United Nations decided it would endorse an International Day of the Tropics, and it chose the date of the launch of that first report, the 29th of June, to be the date for the International Day of the Tropics. I was involved with the advocacy of that International Day, and in the end, it was 75 nations of the world co-sponsored a resolution to the General Assembly, which was passed without dissent, that there would be a day. Since then, this particular group has worked on and launched a number of focus reports, one on sustainable development of the tropics, one on tropical health, another today on the digital divide in the tropics. But most importantly, last year, 5 years on from that initial report, we launched the follow-up major broad brush report in 2020, Is Life in the Tropics Getting Better? And we used the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN in order to come to a conclusion about that. The consortium has met a number of occasions, most recently in 2019 in Singapore. Prior to that, the Rockefeller Foundation supported a meeting at Spalagio Centre in Italy as well. And we're absolutely committed to continuing to work together and indeed to expand that work to make sure that what we're doing is worthwhile. And I think it's just fantastic that there are so many other groups that are also share the vision about focusing on the issues of the tropical world. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Anne, who'll say a little bit about the challenges and the strengths of our approach to this alliance. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Sandra. Well, I thought I'd take the opportunity to think about, I guess, a little bit more of a logistics view of such an alliance. I think the really first important strength that I can talk about that has driven the Strait of the Tropics is to have strong central leadership, which Professor Harding has managed to do over the years of the project. That helps with institutional buy-in, both from our institution at James Cook University and the other institutions in the partnership. I think without her leadership, it may not have lasted beyond one report. So that's a testament to her commitment and enthusiasm for the project. I think a really other, strength of the project is that we created a really compelling narrative. There are many ways to talk about the tropics, but we've always sort of managed to keep that narrative of something that is shared, future-focused, and with the view that there is huge potential for the tropics. And I think people really respond to that. We've also managed to, stay agile, if you like, and respond to the changing nature of international development. I mean, our first report came out in 2014. The Sustainable Development Goals were signed into being in 2015. So we were really careful about making sure that the narrative that we were pushing aligned with the global development agenda at the time. Fortunately, there was a fair bit of forethought that went into that, so it managed to do it quite well. We worked really hard on creating an environment for the partners of the project. So engaging with the Alliance is not too onerous. We didn't want to take up too much of their time or resources because we were sort of running on the smell of an oily rag anyway. So we needed to make sure that we were able to engage them with the least, impact and greatest outcomes for them. And that particularly was relevant for those institutions from developing countries who may not have the time and the resources that others would have to engage in such a project. So we had to really create an environment that allowed space and resources for them to engage. Just a quick one on some of the challenges in these kind of alliances. So we kept the alliance as an informal one, which works in both ways. So an informal alliance means that we can engage fairly easily and leverage expertise without having to put in that formal commitment. But on the flip side, there's drawbacks when you don't necessarily have formal institutional buy-in for the continuation of the relationship, between the institutions. So what happens quite frequently in academia and international collaborations, I'm sure, is that your key contact person at an institution for being part of that partnership will quite often move on to another institution, which is really normal in the research sector. But what that means is that, from the secretariat of such an alliance, you have to start building that relationship again. Fortunately, we have an excellent narrative, so we were able to do that. So that's just really quickly in a nutshell. What I would like to say before I finish, though, we're facing a world at the moment that is increasingly resource poor. So we're talking about even wealthy countries are pulling back on international aid and international spending and really looking inwards at their own situation. So I think in that space, it's really important that we do continue to focus on international partnerships. I think we'll have to probably speak louder and champion them more in order to sort of keep working towards that safe, prosperous and sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I would like to add that our slogan, which is "The future belongs to the tropics," we actually adapted from the State of the Tropics project. Once I saw their website and it said that the future belongs to the tropics, and I said, that's it. This is the message that we have to send to all the people in the tropics, especially the young people. And I know that people who have joined me in the past, my regret has always been that the tropical sciences, whether it's the social or the natural sciences, are not attractive to the young people who prefer to look at AI or robotics or nanotechnology. But I think I'm hoping to make what Anne calls the compelling narrative, particularly for the young people. Remember, more than half the young people are going to be in the tropics in the future, and they did not look for a future in America or Japan, but that it is here in the tropics. Anyway, let's go on to the next speaker, Mina Rahman. my good friend Mina Rahman, there in Penang. Now, Mina Rahman is a legal advisor and senior researcher at the Third World Network, TWN. At the Third World Network, Mina currently coordinates the climate change program and has been actively involved in the intergovernmental climate negotiations. Brilliant. Please, Mina, let us hear from you.
Thank you, Professor Mazlan, and greetings to everyone. As Professor Mazlan has mentioned, I am from Penang, Malaysia. I'm representing the Third World Network, currently actually the head of programs. Sorry, I did not send you my updated bio, but doesn't matter. But just to give you a context, many people around the world do not know about the Third World Network. Actually, by the name itself, it was very oriented towards serving the third world, putting the third world first. Basically, was how we began. In 1984, over 100 participants came together at a conference in Penang, Malaysia, actually started by a non-governmental organization called the Consumers Association of Penang, which was actually convening a huge conference called Third World Development or Crisis. So before even the Rio Summit or the Earth 1992 Rio Summit was born, we were already in the forefront of looking at the environmental and the development nexus. And so many of us were actually children of Rio, and many of us were actually very active. So Mazlan, when you say that, how do you attract young people? I do think that a lot of it, I mean, in the climate world, the climate justice movement, in the forefront is actually the youth. And many of them are very excited. Maybe they're not so excited about academia, but they're certainly excited about being in this, processes. So the Third World Network was very deliberate. So in a sense, I think in the context of the tropics, as you mentioned, it was much more about serving the interests of the developing world. And we are a non-governmental organization. And one of the biggest challenges for us was how to make ourselves relevant to government. Because most of the time, government doesn't pay attention to non-government organizations. Who are you, Why are you knocking on our doors? Most of the time, you're a bloody nuisance. But what is it that for us, managed to actually grow in alliance with the developing world was that, and this is one best practice. What is it that we have to offer? I think in terms of the research and the analysis. And we were looking at global policy making because increasingly we were recognizing that much of the perspective and thoughts that were coming, whether in your media, whether in your research, whether in your newspapers, a lot of it was actually a bias that comes from the North. And so even in the academic world, a lot of the education, we looked at the education, whose science, who does it serve? And we were questioning all this, and we came up with this idea that we do need to bring together the scientists, the social scientists, the academics, the teachers, and NGOs, social movements, governments working together, and the international arena. So the one thing is, what do we have to offer? The thing that we could offer was actually analysis. A lot of the analysis which was rooted actually from actual evidence based on the ground to analysis that was actually very, very breakthrough. Nobody was looking at them. Let me just give you an example. In the Earth Summit in 1992, the whole focus was actually on, the state of the world, and we all know that the environment and biodiversity and everything was collapsing. So the population problem was seen as the biggest issue. But what was not actually placed heart and center was who was actually behind that destruction. The 20% of the world destroying 80% of the resources. And what Mazlan, you mentioned right at the beginning, the inequity of the world, basically the inequality and the inequity, which has to be in that context. And out of Rio came this concept of common but differentiated responsibility, a principle that we still hold to very dear today in the various UN fora. And so although we were civil society actively campaigning at the national level for the protection of forests, biodiversity, and the destruction of ecosystems, we were also aware of the fact that until and unless you have financial resources coming to developing countries, technology transfer coming to developing countries, the equity dimension of the problem, you're not going to go very far. So this is where we came with that perspective. And I think this perspective, working with the Group of 77 in China, for instance, which is the negotiating body that negotiates for the interests of developing countries. And then after that, as we were going to other processes, and also to mention that in the international arena, a lot of the times, the civil society voices are represented by Northern civil society. So when we came into the stage, we were bringing in a lot of civil society from the developing world, a different perspective, a different lens, and a different contribution that we were making, which is rooted in sustainable development, that you don't look at the environment in a silo, but you look at it in the context of equity and so on, and international cooperation. So then we moved on to the Climate Change Convention. So the other lesson that we have to draw is, if our objective is clear, and if we are relevant because of the research that we bring, and it inputs into policy making, Third World Network is deliberately in the international policy making arena. It's about taking part in the processes that actually globalize decision making. Because as I said, we were discovering that a lot of the decision making is not in the hands of our government. A lot of it is being made through international processes. So while at the same time, the 1992 Earth Summit and UN processes and the UNFCCC, the Convention on Biological Diversity, so we've been all engaged in those fora very actively, offering ideas, offering perspectives, and even taking part in the negotiations and offering views. And so we brought in that, and I think that was viewed as very helpful, particularly for developing country governments. And why? Because what they recognize is that they did not have that information. They were not always the purveyors of knowledge. In fact, they were far behind. So that capacity building, that convening of meetings, the pulling together of like-minded megadiverse countries or the like-minded developing countries in the climate negotiations, for instance, and Africa Group and others. So actually serving the community in terms of real needs of what they needed. And the other aspect of course, the World Trade Organization, which is the complete opposite of the UN. The UN was collaborative, it was partnership, it was international cooperation. Then you have that World Trade Organization, which began a whole range of globalization of decision-making through economic policy. They were everything was in the name of trade. And so we saw a very competitive world. Instead of cooperation, you actually had competition. And here, like just to give you one example, the trade in intellectual property rights. I mean, suddenly everything had a trade in front of it, like intellectual property doesn't belong to a free trade organization, but intellectual property was there. And you as scientists know, innovation is important, intellectual property is important, but the abuse and misuse of intellectual property is where there's a lot of problem. And just the COVID pandemic and all that issue about the waiver of the TRIPS agreement to make sure that the vaccines and the whole gamut of the PPEs and all the paraphernalia you need to support developing countries, and that upper side of vaccines is what we have seen. So Third World Network, together with civil society, helping governments, we are really right there in terms of this big discussion about the TRIPS waiver. So the lessons here are that there is a lot of capacity that civil society can bring in. NGOs are very much into it. Some of our governments are not aware. For instance, even if you look at free trade agreements, they don't read every clause, every full stop. Whereas we have lawyers. I mean, TWN, we have the largest number of women and lawyers. And with our larger pool of collective, it's really about analysis and looking at what is behind these agreements and how will you be impacted? Are you completely open? I mean, are you understanding what you're walking into? So these are the kinds of issues that we bring forward. I can go on for a whole day, but I shall not. But just to say, the best practices again are precisely that you have the researchability, you have something that governments need, and there is a definite need in terms of collaboration between like-minded countries, because we are in the arena of big global battles. So although the Tropics sounds very nice, and you know, in the academia, it's very nice. It's massive competition and fights if you go into the international arena, and we are all part of that discourse. So the final point I wanted to just take off from where Anne was, and I agree. Governments change, people change, and then you have to start all over again. But the point is, many of them come back to us because we have the institutional memory. We have the history. We know where what every document is about. And I just want to advertise this as an example. It's a book that by my late husband and me, a clash of paradigms in terms of, we call it the clash of climate change paradigms, negotiations and outcomes from the UN Climate Conference, tracing it from Bali right up to the latest in Madrid. So if you want to know what happened blow by blow, this is where it is. So we share this with a lot of governments, and they say, oh my God, we had no idea. So I think the best practice there is actually the offering of the institutional knowledge, the memory, the history, and we are informal. We are issue-based, we are fora-based, and we work according to the needs of countries. And of course, sometimes we identify the need ahead of governments. For instance, the GMOs. People did not know in our part of the world, the genetic modified organisms, genetically modified. And Malaysia actually took this up and gave rise to what the Cartagena Protocol on genetically modified organisms. So sometimes we are ahead of the curve. Sometimes we are behind the curve. So I do think that this is really an important way of working. And for us in the Third World Network, you can Google us, and I'll put our website address on our chat, and I'm happy to engage in questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mina. And your focus on the third world countries is very important. As you say, they are not the purveyors of knowledge. They lack the capacity and capability. But the fact that as a Third World Network, you've been able to galvanize civil society. And one thing you said was very important, and the fact that you were talking about intellectual property rights, and you were engaging in those issues at the Third World Network. I say that because remember I said right from the very beginning that the highest biodiversity regions are in the tropics, and we are losing a lot of that intellectual property because we either don't care, we don't know, and this is what I think we need to change. And that's the idea of the alliance actually came to me actually precisely through the biodiversity path. But in general, I think we need this kind of collaboration, and your Third World Network actually tells us how to galvanize or bring in the civil society, especially. Thank you, Mina. Now, we come to a totally different kind of grouping here. I was totally intrigued when I saw this grouping. It doesn't have the word tropical there, but it still has issues, it still deals with issues in the tropics. And so to tell us about the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force from the USA is Fernando Briones. So Fernando, please, the floor over to you now.
Hey, thank you, Professor Maslan. Hi, everyone. This is Fernando Briones. I'm based at the University of Colorado in Boulder, Colorado, in US. And let me just share my screen so I can share my presentation. It's going to be quickly. Give me just a second. And there you go. Well, let me try to summarize what we do. It's sometimes a little bit challenging to try to explain, but it's kind of simple. We just work at subnational level. We realized, well, my fellow coworkers realized years ago that the fight against climate change and deforestation was very, very slow. and with the leadership at the time of a group of governors, including former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, they just found with 10 states and provinces in Brazil and Indonesia and the United States, the GCF Task Force. And the idea basically is to work with subnational governments to facilitate some of the funding opportunities for getting money to apply and implement solutions for climate change, including and mainly deforestation and other aspects like for instance, commodity-driven deforestation and trying to improve the change for reducing emissions and many other aspects. You will see it later. Now, after a few years, we have covered 100% of the Brazilian Amazon, 85% of Peruvian Amazon, mostly 65% of Indonesian forests, and 65% of Mexico's tropical forest. We have basically regional coordinations in those countries. Plus, we have delegates and associates in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Nigeria, in Ivory Coast. So I want to share what we do, basically. We want to help governments to deal with the increased responsibility to work with the environmental issues. There's institutions that simply cannot find the budgets, and they cannot do it everything. They can do it by themselves, but they need to share some of the partnerships in order to make it better and faster. The commitments of the agreements international agreements are sometimes too fast for the resources that subnational governments have. And I think we can try to get together and to share. And this is something important. We are a network, and this network shares. And we have the idea that we can support the empowerment of governors and civil servants. We can connect them with the local populations. We can probably try to help to unlock the resources. And we track the progress to indicators. We report, obviously, we try to report as much as we can in a in a context where there's so many data available. We try to get everything together to try to track the impact that we do. And also we want to support governors and ministers of environment to plan and to set up an environmental agenda. And this is a good example in Amapá, in the state of Amapá in Brazil, where basically there was a Governor Valdez, who didn't have a very clear environmental agenda, but with the work with GCF and the delegates and the structure by itself, he was invited to an annual meeting, the place that we gathered together and we share experiences. And now he's moving forward to an environmental agenda. And I think this is a very good example of how a governor who has different priorities can commit to something useful, powerful, politically interesting to him and to his political party, but also important to the forest. And I think that was a example of how sharing could be a good way to inspire too. We met every year in a annual meeting, but unfortunately with COVID we couldn't make it last year. And we try to empower the people and the delegates of the institutions. We have, as a network, a relationship with private sector, with civil organizations, international governments, international institutions, in many communities. And this is important. Again, communities are the baseline of our network. The structure that we try to implement is always to be accountable in the top to down and not just down to top and top to down. And I mentioned this because one of the things that we worry a lot is not just to it's not ignore the local communities. We have commitments and guiding principles in order to make decision making very, very transparent. We don't decide in the Secretariat of the GCF what states and provinces want to. We don't decide what they should do. We consult them, and we try always to find the way to communicate with the donors and communicate with the other participants what will be a good decision-making process, and not just with the people and have them together. This is basically the first approach in the way that we use the resources. We develop a jurisdictional approach to work with the states, and then we try to find innovation founding, which is basically implementation. What we do exactly, we try to support the reduce of deforestation in all these states that I show in the map, and I go back to the map in a few minutes. And we focus in building governance, building capacities. And this is something hard to explain because sometimes governance and capacity building it's a non-tangible result for the donors. But the truth is, and I pay attention in what the previous speakers mentioned about tracing the people in the networks, that sometimes people change from one institution to another. Well, if there's something that we can observe within the GCF, is that people, the local civil servants, they change also, but the governments change, but the civil servants remain. And that means that if we build up capacities with the civil servants, if we empower those civil servants, we can build up a powerful baseline to continue to make this work happen, even if the governors change. And I think one of the important reasons to work with subnational governments, with jurisdictions or province and states, is that sometimes the actions at national level are very slow. And let me just provide a very simple example. And I go back to the map. In Peru, in the last 2 years, there's been a lot of political instability at national level. And legislative coup d'etat, elections with fraud, accusations for the presidents, four presidents basically in 1 year. But at subnational level, at jurisdictional level, there's been some kind of instability, some stability and the people get together to keep working. And so sometimes working at a different scale, like regional scale, it's a good way to apply something. It's a feasible scale, and that give us a lot of knowledge about what happened in the field. At the GCF, we are committed to try to understand what happened in the field with our delegates, that they're the frontliners of the work that we do. We want not just to be an organization who want to impose something from their offices in United States or in London or Geneva. We want to be an organization who pay attention about the needs of the people. Let me see how much time I have. Okay. I don't know. I cannot. Because I'm sharing my presentation, my screen. I cannot see how much time I have, but I want to be quick with this. We also are focusing sustainable supply chains, commodity driving deforestation, and also we've been working hard to work with the standards, for tropical for forest deforestation, basically. And now there's emerging opportunities about carbon markets and bioeconomy. We are obviously exploring bioeconomy and carbon markets like a resource of funding and opportunities for the places that we work. And again, we just facilitate those connections. We are not an organization who give money directly. We try to find the money and try to connect the dots together and facilitate those processes in order to make governance happen in a positive way, in a good impact for the tropical forest. And we want to engage with the people in the communities in a very serious way. And again, just for finish and for ending my short presentation, this is the place that we're the places, the states and the jurisdictions that we work with. And in Asia, we have basically only Indonesia, but we have many states in Indonesia who has been very successful reducing deforestation. As you may, I'm sure you guys know better than me, there's a lot of pressure for commodities in Indonesia, or palm oil, palm, and other commodities that they're very, they became a threat for the forest. And we want to make sure that we can facilitate some of the information, data, and also governance to make to reduce that deforestation, and also to find alternatives and better opportunities for the forest and for the protection of the forest in the tropics. And yeah, we work only in the tropics. Basically, the partners in US, there are basically political partners. Obviously there's no tropical forest in the US. But again, just for finishing, I think if there's something that we learn is the networking, being here with you all, interacting and listening other experiences. It's always inspiring, but also is building capacity. This is not tangible right now, but maybe tangible in the future. And we hope to be there to share it with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fernando. I told you all this would be an intriguing grouping, having governors, how much governors can push in their constituencies. While we have international declarations of many types, and it's actually the work that moves the declarations actually is done at the local level, is done at the local governments and local authorities. I found that out previously in my work for Agenda 21, when we first had the declaration from Rio. And so we had a big local agenda conference, with UKM. And as you can see, because of the kind of focus, the context were more of the civil servants. And I'm intrigued that while the politicians might change, the civil servants will not change. This is true some sort because the civil servants will stay on, but of course civil servants promote, like in Malaysia, they go across the ministries. And again, you have to, like Mina says, we have to start all over again, convincing even civil servants the importance of your work or your organization. And of course, linking, we saw how you link your task force is linked to the negotiations at international level, similarly with Third World Network. And I can see lots of lessons in your jurisdictional strategies and also in investment. And I'm sure the politicians are very good in that. And I like very much that you were included in the tropical forest standards. I know you said California doesn't have tropical forest, but there you have a tropical forest standards. Okay, so you have 3 different kinds of organizations there. They bring different strengths to our conversation today. So I would like to ask the panel, I'll see whether there are questions from let me see, from you guys. You don't seem to have any questions, but I would like to ask the panel then. So you have your different mechanisms, the different ways you do your work, and you've heard the other 2. So how do you see, what would be the best way for us to have some kind of umbrella tropical alliance. I call it umbrella, but I don't want to use the word alliance because some of you feel, oh no, that's too strong. Maybe a cohort, maybe a network, a grouping. How can you see, with your experience and the others, what would you think would work in terms of an umbrella of tropical countries grouping? Can I ask you first, Fernando, because you started last, and let me just go to you. How do you see the situation?
It's a very hard, it's a very challenging question, especially in those times. I'm not gonna give you the answer. Probably I'm gonna disappoint you, but why? Because I'm a little bit old-fashioned, and I think. This is my personal experience. I'm not talking on behalf of GCF, maybe. I'm talking about my experience as an anthropologist. I think when we just got together in a meeting, we share more than in network. In obviously, webinars are great. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I'm sure we are learning very much. But when we are together in an annual meeting, we just spend 3 days. I know it's cost money, there's emissions, I know all this, but also we just networking, we hear experience, we get inspired, and we always return back home with some knowledge, a big one. So I will not answer your question, how can we build that umbrella? But I'm gonna say that in-person meetings are always the best way to accomplish something very powerful. And that's what we rely on our annual meetings. Every year we do an annual meeting, and sometimes even the COPs, you guys know better than me how COPs sometimes looks like, but it's an opportunity. And in person, I believe in in-person interaction. That's my comment.
Thank you. But I didn't tell you in the beginning, but the tropical Topside was originally slotted for September of 2020. We had big plans to bring lots of people together. And I totally agree with you, Fernando. Nothing beats face-to-face. And within half an hour over a cup of coffee, you can do so much more than having a webinar for even 2 hours, versus that body language and all that. Too, I totally agree with you. And so we are pushing, we are hoping that by having this Topside conference, we will continue to have Topside, the next Topside every 2 or 3 years. And eventually, we hope that it will become a face-to-face meeting. But totally agree with you, when we do have an alliance of sorts, we have face-to-face, sure. And Mina, what about you? Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I actually do think that, well, I agree that conferences are useful, but they're very expensive, as Fernando himself said. Yeah. Third World Network itself, as I said, was born out of a conference, so it inspired people to do something more. I would actually ask what the purpose of the alliance is. I think that's really very important. What is the purpose of the alliance? Because otherwise, the usefulness, the relevance, and all that becomes an issue. Because there's really information overload out there. It's just so much out there. And many of us don't have time even to read all that is produced. So I do think that the essential question, Maslan, that you and others need to ask is, what is the usefulness of another network, alliance, whatever? What is it that it will do that is different or it's not being met by others? Because just to give you an example, there are a lot of other, I know Fernando says face-to-face is very good, but there are also other platforms where you actually pool resources together, all the best papers on this issue, all the best material on this, if you want this and this is what it is. So there are a lot of digital platforms also available in terms of materials, if people want materials and this and that. So my question really is, what is it that you're trying to do? So if we answer that and we are clear about that, I think then the next steps become a little bit easier?
I can answer that very quickly. You heard me in the beginning. I said that one lesson my team and I have learned from organizing this 12 webinars is where the information is all over the place. It takes us such a long time to discover people, to discover organizations. Now, the first thing we should do is to be able to share information and data on one platform. I'm not sure what that platform is going to look like going forward, but I think I'm not saying that just one click you discover everybody, but we would like, to create some kind of web page, for instance, that all the institutions that we have discovered, we will put that down in that web page as a result to show what the information that we have, and we want to share that information. Then, of course, there's data sharing. I think some of the people in this, amongst the participants are tropical biodiversity people, and they know the problem of sharing data in the tropical biodiversity aspect. How do we do that? We're not sharing. If you look at tropical biodiversity in the world and the data that you collect, there's a big gap across the tropics. That was also another reason why I thought for countries in the tropics to get together to share the data, at least amongst themselves, if they're afraid to share the data with others for reasons of intellectual property rights. And of course, once we can connect to each other easier, it'll be easier to create synergies. I will not say much more beyond that there should be synergies. As I said, either we have international negotiations positions, how do we create the projects, go to World Bank, whoever is funding, if we can synergize. Not too much from me. Sandra and Anne, some thoughts from you.
Look, thank you very much. I mean, I think these are important questions. I agree. I'm missing in-person meetings. I think many people are, because of that vicarious interaction that you talk about and the benefits that can accrue to that. I think Nina's question too is such an important one about what it is we're trying to achieve out of this. And certainly as part of our project, we've established something called a tropical data hub. So the vision is very much, as you identified, Maslan, and it's just containing, the idea is it is to be a repository for some data. Now, it hasn't got everything in it, but maybe this is something that we could look to do much more broadly as a tropical data hub, because I agree with you. If we had a place to go where we've got valid and reliable data and in a commons where people then can utilize those data, I think that could be very beneficial. The other thought that I have about an alliance, and I think about this in the work that was done so that we could get this International Day for the Tropics, it started with advocacy. And some of the small island nations, for example, there's 44 of them or 47 of them, many of them in the tropics, they saw the power of a focus on the tropics. In the end, as I say, it was 75 nations of the world co-sponsored this resolution to have recognised that the tropics exists, that it is a place, that there are real issues and compelling issues in the tropics, and we need to recognise that and to think about that in a different way than perhaps we have in the past. So where I think about it, there was sort of a political recognition at that point. And so we have the Tropical Day. I guess I wonder too, in addition to the many, many groups that are working on parts of the issues of the tropics and getting those data in a commons, I think is a brilliant idea, Maslan, if we could achieve that. But then I think something perhaps larger, but it may be well beyond the scope of what we would want to do.
Okay.
But for some years, I did some work at the University of Aberdeen with a fellow there who was very interested in the issues of the Arctic world. And so when I was spending some time with him, he shared with me the issue of North and how those Arctic nations share a common set of concerns and interests, certainly around social and economic phenomena, but climate change, plainly, is very important for them too. And so as we know, there is a thing called the Arctic Council. So there's been a council established of nations that do focus on, and they meet, I don't know how regularly, but they do meet regularly, and they have an agenda which looks at the issues of the Arctic. Now, of course, the Arctic peoples are diverse too, but they're not quite so many nations of the world, and so much difference as there is in the tropics. But again, I sort of think, well, wouldn't it be amazing if we could have a bit of a think about a forum of that nature too?
Yeah, a tropical forum. Yeah, oh, brilliant. Okay, as you say, that tropical data hub is something we definitely can work on. As I said, if you look at biodiversity data alone, there's a big gap in the tropics, ocean data, all kinds of data, even climate change data. There are a lot of gaps in the tropics. And imagine if we can get all the countries to to get together all that information. Now, if I'm looking at my time, it's I have 6 more minutes of this discussion before I wrap up. Alia, are there any questions from the audience? No, that's fine. So anybody wants to say some last words about collaboration?
And Penny might like to add to my comments from before. I was just wondering if Anne might have the opportunity.
Sorry?
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Sandra. She was just
pushing me forward. Sorry, Anne. Yes, Anne, please.
Well, I don't actually. I was going to. I think the Sandra's the sort of ambitious idea of bringing countries together in some sort of council is absolutely amazing. I was just thinking. I was listening to the conversation, and I actually wrote down 3 words starting with D, based on. So the first one was dialogue, directory, and data. So all of those topics came up in the conversation, dialogue being terribly important for achieving anything, regardless of your objectives, and then directory and data. So that is obviously the network situation, bringing those things together. Yes. I guess for me, I'm not going to add anything more of how such an alliance might work. I just guess to throw the hat in the ring about part of the objectives of any kind of group. One of our major messages that we developed through State of the Tropics is around the need for tropical countries, tropical institutions to, I guess, develop their own expertise, like the Third World Network has done, actually, by the sounds of things, to address their own problems. So we talked about capacity building a lot. I think all 3 of the presentations talked about capacity building. So I've just thought I'd throw that in as a C next to the 3 Ds, if you like.
Great. So thank you very much. So we've heard all the speakers and some great ideas. Now, if I love that. I mean, it's a nice, almost an ending where you perfectly identified the 3 Ds, as you say, dialogue, directory, and data. The last 2 of which belong in a network. And I think it would be very nice if an organization like the Mahathir Science Award Foundation, which is promoting, advocating tropical sciences, could be part of pushing that agenda. So if we are thinking of that umbrella alliance or grouping or cohort or network, to bring people in, as mentioned, we need a compelling narrative, and I think that what we've been hearing today, that is not so difficult to do. I think we have a very compelling narrative, and that the future belongs to tropics is a slogan that I think everybody will buy. And who do you engage? For your outcomes, that would be the government, civil society, research groups, and especially, I think, for the developing countries. And of course, in the tropics, as I said, 85% of the poorest nations are poorest people, and the majority of the poorest nations are in the tropics, that we develop this, what everyone is talking about, capacity building and capability. So with those thoughts in mind, I think we can move on. I will work with the three of you and with a few other organizations to see what sort of alliance would work. Of course, we will address things like what would be our objectives, what are we planning to have in outcomes of such a network. And we will continue that, because for the tropical science, for Topside, we are eventually going to come up with what we call a Kuala Lumpur Declaration for the Tropics, of course. We all do that, but that's just a declaration. And I think what would be a tangible outcome coming out of that would be us committing to being part of a big group where we share our ideas, our resources, especially our resources, towards making the tropics a future where our young people will be able to enjoy life in. As I said, the idea here is to bring the young people into the conversation. So I think that sort of brings us to the end. There is a question from Salim. Let me read that. Hang on, Salih. Oh, okay. The future belongs to the tropics. He is wondering what it means. Now, when I say the future belongs to the tropics, Saleh, I mentioned it right from the beginning, that the tropics is resource rich. I will just repeat it, and it's a good thing to say right at the end for everyone. The tropics accounts for 40% of the world's total surface, Saleh, but hosts nearly 95% of the world's mangroves. We host 80% of the world's biodiversity. 54% of the world's renewable water resources are in the tropics, and 82% of the world's living languages are spoken in the tropics. And by 2050, let me quickly say that we will host more than half of the world's population and 2/3 of the children. Where do you think that the future will be? It's with our young people. And if 2/3 of the young people are in the tropics is definitely the future of the world. And of course, I mentioned that it's said that 85% of the poorest people also live in the tropics. But that's exactly the reason why we must together come up with solutions, not from outside of the tropics. Why? We in the tropics, I think, can formulate those solutions. Now, we had polls given to you, and the first was, which sector do you belong to? A lot of you are from academia, some from civil society, some from business, some from policy. The next one is, can you show me the next one, please, Vashi? I think it's Vashi who's sharing it with us. Now, when I ask what is the most critical issue for an alliance of the tropics to address, and I said that you can only pick one because there are all so many, actually, biodiversity loss is the biggest. Saleh, we are very happy to hear that. Next was climate change. Next was health inequity, urban poverty, and then rural development. Very interesting. And the last one, there's a third one, isn't there, Vashi? I thought I asked 3 questions. Yeah, here. Okay, so we've been discussing whether there's this alliance. I use the word alliance, as I said, just for the lack of another word. And what roles could an alliance of the tropics play? And again, I wanted people to choose just the one. And the 29% thought coordinating policies would be its best role. The other thing was coordinating research, equal to NGO networking and collaboration. I love that. And then to develop common positions in international negotiations, followed by streamlining approach for funding requests. You know, we should not compete against each other. We should complement each other. That's my point about networking. So there you are, 6 the responses to our polls, and we have are there any, oh, okay, I see one more question and answer. We all coming late. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, so that takes us 2 minutes to 6:45, and basically that's when I'm supposed to shut down this webinar. So let me take this opportunity in this last minute or so to thank my distinguished, esteemed panelists who brought so much to of their experience to the webinar. And I think you have given me some ideas on how to construct the coming conversations with other people as well. Of course, we have to keep engaging more and more people, but I did think it would be good to have some basic ideas. And we have that. And we have those basic ideas today. Can't thank you enough for helping me. Actually, this is to help me moving forward to formulate that Kuala Lumpur Declaration and have that alliance network amongst ourselves. Okay, so I will now pass back the webinar to Alia. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Prof. Mazlan, and thank you to all the panelists. I think we had such diverse experiences and diverse sharings today. So we thank you all for being with us. And I'd like to wish everyone a happy International Day of the Tropics. And now we've sadly reached the end of the webinar. So all we ask from you is to fill in the feedback form afterwards. And just to mention, the conference that Professor Mazlan was talking about earlier, it's open for registration and the link will be emailed to all of you after the webinar. That's it from us today. See you soon and goodbye. Thank you.